New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we are going to get an update on the activities of the Rhine Research Center and the Rhine Education Center, two of the most important organizations historically and today in the field of parapsychology. My guest is John G. Kruth, who is the Executive Director of the Rhine Research Center and the founder and education director of the Rhine Education Center. He has been a member of the Rhine Research Team since 2009 and is currently working on a number of research projects related to macro and micro psychokinesis, healing methodologies and their effects, bioenergy, applications and evaluation of remote viewing, and general ESP protocols and experimental methods. I've also seen some papers by John on the topic of poltergeists. Oh, one more thing. I want you to know that I interviewed John previously. It was in December of 2018, and at that time, he gave a very detailed, important rundown on the history of J.B. Rhine and the Rhine Research Center and the original parapsychology laboratory at Duke University. If you haven't watched that interview yet, I highly recommend it. It'll be very helpful in understanding today's video. And I'm linking to it right now if you have a computer that can accept that link in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. John is based in Durham, North Carolina. And now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, John. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Jeff, it's always good to see you. Thanks for inviting me.
You've been at the Rhine Research Center now for going on 16 years. I think it's fair to say that in many respects, not in all respects, but certainly in many, the Rhine Research Center is right at the heart of American parapsychology.
Well, yes, we've been around. We have a great legacy, which has brought us to where we are now. And we've been around for so long. This is our 90th anniversary of the lab this year that was founded at Duke University. So we have a lot of events planned for this year to celebrate the 90th anniversary. And I'm happy I'm here to talk to you about some of the things that are going on.
Well, 90 years is really quite a legacy. And I know we did a wonderful interview earlier. I'm encouraging our viewers to view it, in which we talked about the amazing impact that J.B. Rhine had worldwide in the 1930s. Many people today are unaware of all of that, but you're carrying on that legacy.
Well, I feel honored to be carrying on that legacy. And what's amazing about what J.B. did is he did it in a time where global access was not nearly as the way it is now. He was using radio shows to mostly be able to contact people and tell them about the work that was being done at the lab. And the fact that he was able to attract attention around the world just speaks to how important the topics he was covering are to everyone around the world now.
The great irony to me is even after 90 years, after, I guess it's fair to say, over 1,000 published scientific experiments and meta-analyses and articles published in major scientific journals. There's still a substantial portion of, in particular, a portion of the scientific community that just rejects it out of hand. And in fact, some of the skeptics have recently said it doesn't matter how good the data is, it's impossible, so we reject it.
Well, and that all has to do with their worldview and their model of the world. If you look at the world from a reductionist, materialistic paradigm, then what we study, it's impossible. But it happens. And this is the amazing thing, the fact that we see it happening, people experience it, and the fact that we're able to verify it in controlled experiments. This all gives us something that we have to continue to pay attention to if we're going to get a true picture of what the world is like, and if we're going to be able to create a model of the world that is consistent. Because right now, the materialistic model is broken, and not only related to parapsychology, but related to quantum physics as well.
Well, it's certainly the case that the Newtonian worldview doesn't apply at the quantum level. But just personally, I would say I haven't given up on materialism 100%. I think that there is at least a possibility that a clever person will be able to explain psi phenomena, and we should define that term in terms of a modified materialistic paradigm, maybe one that has multiple dimensions of space and time.
Oh yes, I agree completely. I mean, the idea is to incorporate everything we know and not ignore things just because it doesn't fit the model that we have now. And so the materialistic paradigm, it works really well for engineers and applying, building bridges. I mean, we don't do that with psi, right? But physics works very well. But there are other things that fall outside of physics, which tell us there must be more.
Yeah.
There has to be more. And this is where we continue our studies.
Now, I'm pretty sure the use of the term psi emerged out of the Duke Parapsychology Laboratory. Let's talk about that word.
Well, psi is a word. A lot of people think it's an abbreviation or that it has something specific that it's representing. But really, it is a term that's been used to incorporate a number of different phenomena that we study within parapsychology. J.B. Rhine, in 1934, he wrote a monograph that he called Extrasensory Perception. And in that monograph, he defined the outline of the field of parapsychology as three specific phenomena he was looking at. One was telepathy, or mind-to-mind communication. Another was clairvoyance, getting information about objects or events that might be distant or hidden from us. And the third is precognition, getting information through time, usually from the future, but sometimes also from the past. These three things together, telepathy, clairvoyance, and precognition, he called extrasensory perception. Now, in addition to this, he started studying whether mind-matter interaction was real, and he started using dice to study this, and found that people could control the roll of the dice with their intention. And as he discovered this, he said, well, we have a new phenomena that we're going to call psychokinesis, PK. There's different terminology for it, but he was using psychokinesis at that time. He saw all of the ESP phenomena and psychokinesis as phenomena that seemed to be originating from a similar foundation. And so to describe and discuss all of these phenomena, he used the term psi. And psi, like I said, it doesn't stand for anything, but it's just a way for us to speak about these phenomena in a single terminology.
Many people would associate parapsychology with other things that you didn't mention. Reincarnation, survival after death, altered states of consciousness, mystical experiences, spirit guides, divination. Would you include those in your definition of psi?
Personally, I don't see that as psi. I see psi as incorporating just the terms that we discussed earlier. Mm-hmm. But parapsychology does also study the survival hypothesis. which incorporates everything from near-death experience, out-of-body experiences, reincarnation, mediumship, and all the experiences with spirits, ghosts, hauntings, these sorts of phenomena. You put all of those together, and that it creates the limits of what we study in parapsychology. You know, Jeff, there's so many other interesting topics out there. I mean, so many people are talking now about UAPs, and UFOs. They're talking about communicating with people from other planets, cryptozoology with Bigfoot, and Loch Ness Monster. These are all really interesting topics. But we, as a science, are limited to those 5 phenomena: the psi phenomena, the 4 psi phenomena, and the survival hypothesis. Now, all of this can kind of be incorporated under the umbrella of consciousness studies. Mm-hmm. And this is how we often discuss what we study in order to give it a general terminology that people can follow.
Well, let's focus on your research, John. I know when we spoke last, many years ago, you were very excited about the idea of biophotons and how they might be correlated in some way with psi phenomena. And I gather you're still doing that research.
Oh, yes, we're still doing it. The terminology has changed a bit. The official terminology is now ultra-weak photon emissions. It incorporates in what we have called biophotons, which is ultraviolet light that emanates from organic matter. Yes, I'm still doing work within that area. I guess I started about 15 years ago, and we're making some progress to understand it better. But, having a single lab working on it, it's kind of slow going at this point. But when we're talking about where I usually start when I'm talking about this research is the fact that I speak to a lot of people who are healers. Mm. I speak to people who do a lot of meditation, or people who do martial arts. And all of them speak of different forms of energy. Healers talk about moving energies through the body. They talk about removing energy blockages and helping energy to flow through the body. Martial artists talk about chi, life force energy in the body. And meditators often talk about kundalini energies in the body. A lot of people talk about feeling and sensing these energies. So my question is, what is this energy? Can we do something to understand this energy better? Well, when we start looking at it, one of the first things we talk to, when we talk to healers, is they talk about feeling kind of a buzz like electricity in the body. Well, we all know our bodies are electrical systems, right? Our nervous system is electrical, and we are, all of our muscles move because of electricity moving through the body. So when we start to explore the electricity of the body, we do find it there, but we have to be really close to the body to measure it. We have to have sensors right on the skin in order to measure it. So we figured, well, a lot of these healers work from a distance. So it's unlikely that they're talking about electricity being a source of their healing energies. Well, they often talk about magnetism as well, how they feel drawn to certain areas or pushed away from certain areas. Well, anytime you have an electronic circuit or anytime you have a flow, you have a magnetic field that goes around it. Mm-hmm. So there's a magnetic field in our body as well. But again, in order to measure it, we have to be right on the body. If we start to move further away, we lose it completely, and everything is around us. And so it doesn't seem to be electricity, and it doesn't seem to be magnetism. What else could it be? Well, a few years ago, we started looking at light as a potential source of the energy. Light is an electromagnetic energy. Of course, we don't see the energy that healers talk about, so we started looking outside of the visible range in the infrared and ultraviolet range. Well, in the ultraviolet range, we have found quite a bit of activity with certain people who are saying they're doing healing, with people who are doing martial arts. We all produce a natural field, a natural light from our bodies. In fact, all organic matter produces natural light. This was discovered many, many years ago, back in the 1920s, but popularized by Fritz Popp in the 1970s, when he started looking at fruits and vegetables that were grown organically or not organically, and looking at differences in ultraviolet light coming from them. Back in the 70s, this is kind of crazy that he was talking about this, but now it's very common in upper level biology for biologists at MIT, at Stanford, in Japan, Italy, all over the world to be looking at what they're calling ultra-weak photon emissions and trying to determine what is it, where does it originate, and why does it exist within our bodies? Not only within our bodies, but all animals, plants, and even single cells produce this light that comes from them. Well, but let's get back to people in my research a minute. So what we do is we bring people into our lab who say they're healers. They say they're martial artists, or they're having different psi phenomena. Sometimes they're mediums and they're having experiences. And we ask them to sit in a really dark room. This dark room is so dark that I have an extremely sensitive piece of equipment called a photomultiplier tube there that can measure a single photon of light every half second. Tremendously sensitive. What I do is I bring people in and I sit them in the room and I try to get a baseline reading on how many photons are coming from their body when they're in a resting state. And what I find is it typically goes from about 12 to 20 photons a second. It varies for each person, so we get a separate baseline for each person. After we have this baseline, when they're sitting and doing nothing, I then say, start your healing activity. Do remote healing, or sometimes we have two people in there and are trying to do healing together. I have someone who might do mediumship work in there. Start their martial arts forms. Do whatever it is that they feel is maybe feeling, produce energy or cause them to feel energies. And I look for changes in that light. What I found is with about 90% of the people who come through the lab, I get no change at all. I get the baseline and it continues through the entire session. But with about 10%, I'm seeing variations. And when I'm saying variations, I'm saying it's going from about 12 to 20 photons. It'll jump up. I'll see spikes up to 80 photons, which is very large, 4 times the baseline. But I also have people who go into the hundreds, have people who get thousands of photons per second, and I've even had 2 people go over 1 million photons a second. When this starts happening, we recognize, hey, you don't need statistics to know that there's something unusual happening in this lab. There's something going on that we want to know more about and learn more about. We want to learn more not only about what we're reading in the lab, but also about the experiences of the people who are in the lab and what they're doing at that time. So what we've been doing since I last talked to you is looking at the experiences of the people and trying to understand which people are more likely to produce this light than others. Because if 90% of people go in the lab and I get nothing, and I've had some really well-known mediums and healers who have long careers, who've done a great deal of work within the field and within their lives to help people, but I'm not measuring anything from them. Why am I not measuring from these people, but other people? I get extremely large values on a regular basis. What are they doing differently? So by breaking down the idea of healing from this generic, singular idea of, hey, we study healing in parapsychology, it's homogeneous to most people. But it's more than this. There are so many different types of healing that people do, whether it be directed and purposeful healing, whether it be unconscious healing that happens sometimes when you have just the presence of a mother with her child can be a healing presence sometimes. These sorts of things are what we look at and try to say, well, if there are differences in the type of the approach that people take to healing, whether it's conscious, whether it's unconscious, whether it's directed, whether it's more holistic in nature. Depending upon the type of healing, are we seeing differences in what's being produced? And this is the work that we've been pursuing at this point. There's other things as well, but Jeff, I'm going to give you a chance to jump in here if you have something to say.
I'm thinking about, of course, many years ago, I was reading up on literature, things like biophotons, and as I recall, the biologists were interested in knowing if cells in an organism communicate with each other using these photon emissions.
Yes. And they've found that these photons are appearing more and more within the body. They're finding it more and more present, for example, in the brain. They're finding that there is ultraviolet light that's being expressed within the brain, and they're considering that it may be a faster communication mechanism than our traditional neurons that we've been talking about. So they're looking at different mechanisms within the body that might be enabled by this light being produced. Cells definitely are producing this light. We just don't know which cells. We don't know exactly how it's being done. And you might read some things online about, hey, this is the way that this biophotons or ultra weak photons, this is how they're produced. But in truth, there's no agreement in biology on exactly how it's being produced or exactly what it's being used for. When we start looking at all of the evidence and what's out there and the possibilities, we can start to look at, well, if psi occurs using potentially either non-materialistic mechanisms, or if it starts using mechanisms that we haven't detected materialistically yet, perhaps these photons are also enabling these processes.
You may or may not know that I've recently formed a relationship with the California Institute for Human Science. We are now offering master's degrees and doctoral degrees with a specialization in parapsychology. And that organization was founded by a Japanese researcher who corresponded with J.B. Rhine, named Hiroshi Motoyama, and he did research on biophotons. He was a yogi, and he also was very interested in the yoga doctrine of the chakras. And according to his measurements and the equipment as you described it with the photomultiplier and so on is over there in their campus in Encinitas, California. He claims that more biophotons are emitted in the areas of the human body associated with the chakras of yoga.
Yeah, it's very interesting work. We are not at our lab looking at specific locations where it's coming from at this point. Mm-hmm. That's really tricky work when you start looking at specific locations, because the light that's being produced, we don't know where it's centered from. And it could be, when we're measuring within a room. In order to go from one of these photomultiplier tubes to the body, you need to have some specialized cabling. And I'm guessing they have this out in California where they're doing the work. I haven't specifically spoken to them about it. But we have looked at ways that we might be able to measure from the different chakra points, or just wherever in the body it seems to emanate from. I would believe, just from my background and the tradition in healing that I come from, that the chakra points may be a location that you may see more. What we often find is that healers are very handed people. Yeah. And so oftentimes they're using their hands, and they're using their hands to detect, they're using their hands to move around. Same with martial artists, they're doing the same thing. Oftentimes we talk about the third eye or the ajna, and we talk about the energies that flow from there as well. Many people feel that this may be a center. This is where I would expect to see some changes. But, we're scientists, Jeff, right? Mm-hmm. We look wherever the data leads us. So we would follow whatever people might describe as, hey, we think it might be coming from this location. We would probably check there first. But we wouldn't stop, of course. We keep looking and see if we can understand where it's coming from.
Obviously, as a parapsychologist, you are committed to the scientific method, but I think I just heard you talk about the healing tradition that you come from. Maybe could you share a little more about that?
That all has to do with why I chose to be into parapsychology in the first place. When I grew up, I learned about meditation. I learned about intention and focusing, and I learned about energy healing from the time I was a small child. It was something that was in my family. My mother was a healer, and her mother, and it was traditional through her family. And my brothers and sisters and I, we used to sit down and do visualization techniques and do meditations. When I was 4 and 5 years old, I was doing this quite regularly with my mom and with my brothers and sisters. So these phenomena, and they're not unusual to me. They're not things that were strange to me. But when I start speaking to my friends and my and other people outside of my family about it, well, let's just say I lost some friends. And some people thought it was very unusual what I was talking about, and I didn't understand why. This is where I started to wonder, hey, is there a way that I can try to explain these things that I know are happening, things that exist, things that work? Can I find a way to explain it to them in a way they'll understand? Well, my dad was an engineer, very practically minded. So I started to consider whether a scientific approach to these things might be reasonable. Mm-hmm. This is when I was a teenager, and I thought this might be something I'd like to study and learn more about. That kind of led me to start doing my own reading because, Jeff, I know you're one of the only people in the world who has parapsychology on your degree certificate. There's very few people who have that. There were no schools for me to go to learn about this whenever I was growing up. There was no place for me to understand. There was a science, and there was, these phenomena were being studied in a traditional way. About when I was in my 20s, after reading as much as I could, I chanced upon a book called Psychic Explorations by Edgar Mitchell, mm-hmm. which had a list in the back of different places that were doing parapsychology research. And one of them was the Rhine Research Center. And I thought, wow, that'd be really great. I'd like to work there someday. Mm-hmm. It took me about 30 years from that point before I actually walked through the doors and was able to do it. But it all kind of stemmed from my early experiences with seeing healing occurring in my home, and learning about intention, learning about visualizations and meditations from when I was very young.
When I first got into parapsychology in my first conference in 1973, which happened to be the same time that I met J.B. Rhine, the president of the association that year was Rex Stanford, and he gave a presidential address which was titled, "Are we scientists or are we shaman?" And he was basically arguing, put away all this shamanism stuff. We are scientists, and we don't want to pollute our own experiments with our shamanistic abilities, so we shouldn't even endeavor. And I thought that was the wrong approach then. I was very interested in the interior experience. And now I see things have really changed in that regard. And parapsychologists these days, more or less, welcome personal experiences where in the past it seemed to be a no-no.
It really varies from person to person, though. There are so many people within the field who say they've never had experiences of their own. And they're approaching it strictly as an intellectual endeavor and a scientific study. I'm not sure I really believe them. They say they haven't had experiences of their own. But there is another side of this. And the other side is, well, if you're going to study the topic, you should really understand what it is. Yeah. And people like Hoyt Edge, who went down to Bali and who did some studies, lived with the Balinese people, lived within their culture, and did an anthropological study of what psi experiences were like within that culture. He learned from engulfing himself in that experience, from really immersing himself so that he could experience everything they were. This is qualitative research. Qualitative research, I would say, well, in the past 40 years within psychology and the social sciences, it's really bloomed and blossomed, become very, very popular. Within parapsychology, I would say within the last 15 years, it's really started to pick up and be accepted. People in the UK, for example, people working with Chris Rowe over in the UK have been studying qualitative research within the field of psychology and looking at psi phenomena qualitatively without trying to prove, hey, is this phenomena real or not, according to what people are saying in the lab. But people are having these experiences. Let's understand these experiences. Let's try to incorporate that into our work. This is something that I adopted 15 years ago when I came to the lab, mainly because Louisa Rhine had studied this going back to the 1930s and 40s. Mm-hmm. She was so far ahead of her time, looking at the experiences of people, not trying to find out are they real in the lab, but collecting cases from people. Thousands and thousands of letters were sent to the lab, and she explored them all. and tried to understand what the experience of having psi phenomena were like and what we can learn from them. Well, again, as we were saying earlier about materialistic versus other paradigms and models, it's the same thing. If we're only going to look at it from laboratory work and what happens in a lab, we're ignoring the fact that people have these experiences outside of the lab. And that's really what we're interested in, is how this can affect people in their daily lives.
Well, I know you've written a number of papers on poltergeist phenomena.
Yes, I wrote one paper that I have on poltergeist phenomena specifically, as I did an investigation, and it was specifically someone who had impacts on electronics. He was having a lot of interference with electronics. He was a teenager at that point, and we interpreted it as unconscious PK. You know, originally poltergeists were considered to be something that were noisy ghosts that were coming and being mischievous and throwing things around. But in this case, we followed the model that William Roll emphasized, which was recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, RSPK. And so this case in particular, I found working with this young boy that we were seeing interference occurring with computers that he was working on. We saw it happening within this house when smoke alarms went off when he went by. He had horrible troubles with cell phones and telephones. And it was disturbing. You know, now when you go to school and you're, a young boy, you're interacting with computers a lot. And having issues working with computers can be very problematic for someone in the school at this point. So they were interested in seeing it go away. So I worked with him and talked to him about the different techniques that he might be able to use to help to determine what's causing this phenomenon. I taught him some very simple relaxation techniques, some visualization techniques, which he had never been introduced to before. But not only him, but also his family members, because they were all part of the experience. They were all experiencing this with him. And I also taught him some mindfulness techniques, some ways that he could start when the event happened. I asked him to think about what you were thinking about at the moment that it happened. When that smoke alarm goes off, when your phone starts acting up, stop and think about, what was I just thinking about? And then think, what was I thinking about just a moment before? Trying to help him to develop an awareness of potential triggers that might cause this to happen. Well, he loved this breathing exercise I taught him to relax and started to use it all the time. After I met with him, after about a week, I got a call from his grandmother. All the disturbances had calmed down and nearly stopped. It was really an amazing advance because it seemed that his anxiety, his strong emotions seemed to be having such an impact that they were causing this unconscious expression of something we might call PK or psychokinesis.
And that is one of the predominant theories these days about the poltergeist, that it's typically sourced from a teenager who has emotional difficulties.
But it's not only teenagers, because I've encountered other people who are, who have had near-death experiences, who have issues with electronics, people who have poltergeist activity when they're adults as well. Yeah, the stereotype is a young girl, and I think a lot of that comes from, the old movies with Carrie and The Exorcist, and that it was young. But it is not gender-based. It is also does not seem to be age-based. It just does seem that there are certain people, when people are going through adolescence, their emotions get stirred up a bit more, and that might be what's causing it at that time. But, so Jeff, working with this young boy and seeing this transformation, but was really impactful to me and made me think, well, how can we bring this into the lab and do more with this? And what really brought it even closer to home was that a few weeks later, his world was disrupted again within his family, and all the phenomena came back again.
Oh.
And it was only after discussing again with his family the relaxation techniques that he was able to calm it down and stop the phenomena from occurring. Now, it's 10 years later, I've talked to his family again, Now, and when I was speaking to his grandmother, she said, I can see 6 computers around me right now. He's studying meteorology. He's using electronics all the time. He has no further problems with electronics. We often see these things kind of come into the people's lives, and over a period of time, they disappear. I'm hopeful that something that we might have done together may have helped him to overcome the anxiety or whatever sort of emotional issues he was having, and allow him to move into a field where he wouldn't have these problems anymore.
It would seem from your description and many other descriptions as well that the spontaneous psychokinesis is in some way related to the emotional state of particular individuals.
It seems like it, Jeff, and this is where, it's the model that I work from whenever I'm encountering these cases. And again, I always go back to the model because the model really shapes your perception of what you're seeing. Yeah. And so it's important to define what the model is. When I'm going into an investigation of any sort, or when I'm encountering someone who's having any sort of experiences like this, I always talk to them about their lives. I don't just look at, I'm very interested, we're going back again to the biophotons and the energies. I'm very interested in the energies, and if we can detect any sort of physical energies that might be responsible for this occurring. But besides that, I'm more interested in the people. And when it's disrupting their lives, how can we help these people to overcome this and help them to live their lives normally? So by having a more holistic approach, discussing their lives with them, understanding what they're experiencing, we may be able to make progress in understanding the origin of these phenomena.
Let's talk about the Rhine Education Center that you founded. The Rhine Institute is certainly one of the most important centers in the world for training parapsychology skills.
As I said before, you have a degree in parapsychology. I had nowhere to go to study my parapsychology. I had to study it on my own. When I came to the Rhine, I actually went back to school to learn research and analysis techniques later in my life when I was in my 40s. And as I started studying these techniques, I was reading parapsychology journals and reading articles that I was encountering from parapsychology and utilizing them in my research that I was doing at the university. It was a great way to be able to integrate this, and I had cooperative instructors who allowed me to use these articles as long as they came from reliable sources, peer-reviewed journals. This gave me enough to learn what I needed to get into the Rhine and start talking to people in a way that I could analyze the research studies. Well, at that time, Christine Simmonds-Moore was also at the Rhine. She had studied in UK and gotten her PhD in psychology with an emphasis on parapsychology in the UK, and she was doing research at the Rhine. And as we began talking, we realized there's no place in the States for people to study this. We don't have anywhere where you can go through not only a program, but there's just individual courses here and there. This was back in 2010.
Yeah.
There were just individual courses that you might be able to take, but nothing really coordinated and organized. So Christine having the background to create an introductory course in parapsychology, I had a background in technology. Together, we worked to form an online school to teach Introduction to Parapsychology. That was in 2010. It was a very popular course at that time. We had, about 60 people in our original course, and over the years, it became more and more people became interested. As more people became interested, we started bringing in other courses. For example, I brought in Lloyd Auerbach to start teaching about field investigations, how to do ghost hunting. Of course, many people are interested in ghost hunting and doing it from a scientific perspective. And Lloyd has a great background and a great history in this area. So he was able to expand the reach of the school to different people. We expanded it to include more parapsychology research, including things like research methods specifically for parapsychology, different types of analysis techniques, ways to learn more about individual phenomena like ESP phenomena, learn about PK phenomena, learn about healing, survival. All of these were individual courses that we started developing. About 7 or 8 years ago, we had such a suite of courses, it became obvious that we were getting beyond the scope of our original intent just to teach people to be scientific parapsychologists. That was our initial scope because there was nowhere to do it. But we realized there were also people who were interested in learning about it from a liberal arts perspective as well. And I spoke with Chantal Toporov, who has been a longtime education director for the Society for Scientific Exploration, and some other people who were doing liberal arts studies who were interested in Psi, and we formed another area of study related to liberal arts and creative sciences. At that point, I guess now it's been about 4 years. The school has expanded, especially whenever the virus took hold with us and a lot of people were looking for things to do online. We were teaching online courses. At that point, the school started to explode. And we broke our studies into 3 different areas, 3 different schools. One is the School of Consciousness Studies, which includes parapsychology and the research methods and everything related to becoming a scientific parapsychologist. Another is the School of Applied Sciences. This incorporates issues like field investigations, using what we learn in different ways, field investigations, remote viewing, out-of-body experiences, lucid dreaming. All of these are being taught under the Applied Sciences School. And in addition, we created another school, which is Liberal Arts and Creative Sciences. Liberal Arts and Creative Sciences is ways to explore these phenomena without specifically doing laboratory work. Maybe by exploring your own experiences, writing about your experiences, through art, through music. How is Psi utilized by people in these different areas, and how can we learn more about Psi from these areas? So now we have, I think it's 5 different certificate programs that you can go through. We are not an accredited university. As you know, that it takes a lot to go through accreditation to have a formal education society that can get federal funding for their education. We have not pursued that yet. But at this point, we have 5 different certificate programs that are taught by professional researchers and professional educators. And we have the integrity of the Rhine Research Center behind us when we're teaching these courses. And it's all at rhineedu.org. So that's my advertisement there, rhineedu.org.
Very, very good. And it's an important resource. I want to make sure our viewers are aware of the possibilities for really getting intensely involved in the field of parapsychology. Certainly the Rhine Research Center is an important resource in that regard. What are some of the other ongoing research programs? Besides the work we're doing with the in the Light Lab, where we're looking at the ultra-weak photon emissions, we've expanded to look at the physiology of people as they're also producing these lights. So oftentimes when we're talking in parapsychology about these phenomena, people focus on the brain and brain activities. This is not my area of expertise, but I believe there's more involved than just brain activity. We find our whole body is involved in all of our processes. And so looking at the physiology of the body when this light is being produced is something that will give us more understanding of why certain people are able to do it and others are not. This is ongoing research. We've done some studies looking at heart rate, blood flow, skin conductance, and these sorts of things. And we're about to publish on this now. In addition, we're doing some collaborative work with people from other areas, including Christine Simmonds-Moore, who's at West Georgia University. She and I just finished a project looking at something called aphantasia. Are you familiar with aphantasia? Aphantasia? No, I don't think that I am. Well, aphantasia is a really interesting phenomenon that I hadn't even learned about until just a few years ago. If I were to ask you to close your eyes and visualize an apple, many people would say, oh, yes, I can imagine an apple.
I can see the apple, and they may be able to smell it. They may be able to describe the color and the shape and everything. And this is how we oftentimes relate visualization to psi phenomena. We often talk about visualize this occurring. We talk about visual intention being enhanced by visualization. But there are some people who have no visual life,
Right.
mental life. Not just people who can't see visually, who can't see, but people who they don't visualize mentally. If I ask them to close their eyes and think of an apple and visualize an apple, they think it's a metaphor. They didn't even realize that there were people who could actually see an image of an apple in their mind. For them, it's all a description of an apple. They understand it more verbally, some of them, and others have different ways of understanding it. Well, what Christine and I have been looking at, and this has been very popular in psychology for about the last 10 years. Psychologists have started to recognize this phenomena and starting to learn more about it. Christine and I started looking at what is this phenomena? Can we understand it better? How does it affect dreaming? How does it affect people's normal thought process? How does it affect memory? If I'm remembering something, I often remember an image of where I was. I imagine an image of the different people involved. But their memories are different. They have a different cognitive style. Our question is, how does this cognitive style affect their ability to have psi activity?
Mm.
Is it something, we've always thought visualization and psi very closely tied together. People who are able to visualize more, we consider our stronger psi experiencers. This is not the case. Not what we found. We found that people are having strong psi experiences and they have no intentional visual life. We just finished this project up in December, and we're in the process of writing it up to publish it at this point. So these are some of the things that we're doing right now at the Rhine.
In other words, your finding was what we could call counterintuitive.
Well, it was for me. Now, and again, it's based on my model of how I see the world and how I see psi occurring. And all of these things, our models are breaking all around us all the time. And it really changes. As our models break, it gives us opportunity. Some people are very resistant and want to hold on to the old models. But as they break, it gives us opportunities to learn more and explore more about how are people really experiencing psi phenomena. And is there something that we can learn from them that we don't know from our traditional historical documents?
Well, it certainly does seem to me in popular culture, people who are very good visualizers often talk about, for example, astral travel. I have books in my library with very, very detailed graphic images of all the different levels of the astral plane that people who claim to have the ability to travel there and visit these locations report. So clearly these are very good visualizers, and most people would assume they must be very psychic, but you're suggesting that if they come into the laboratory and take a test under rigorous conditions, it may not be at all what one assumes.
I'm not sure that I'm going that far. But what I am saying is that that visualization, the ability to visualize, which we have always seen is so closely tied to psi, may not be necessary at all. Because people with no visual mental life are still having psi experiences. They're having mediumship experiences. They're having precognitive experiences. We often talk about people who are precognitive as if they are seers. They're able to see into the future. Our language is built around vision and visualization. Yeah. And yet it's about 3% of the population who are aphantasic. It's incredible. Whenever I speak about this, oftentimes whenever I'm in public and we're having a talk, at least one or two people will stand up and say, "That's me. I never knew that other people could see things but this is me. You're describing me." It's more common than I would have ever imagined. As I said, I did not know about this until just a few years ago. But it is interesting to me to see how how these people can still have these experiences.
You are not saying that if you're a good visualizer, that means that you would be a poor psychic subject. You're just talking about that subgroup of people who are aphantasic.
Yeah, aphantasic, yes. No, people who visualize. Of course, people who visualize, they may even have an advantage over people who do not visual, or not visual. But we don't know that yet. This is some of the things we have to learn more about. I mean, we didn't even know that, I didn't even know that they existed before. So learning how it relates to psi is it's a step forward for us as a field. To recognize some of the mechanism.
At least when I started out in the field, that was known as process-oriented research. You're looking for things that correlate with psychic functioning in the hope of finding a mechanism.
Yes. Oh, very much so. You know, from my perspective, J.B. Rhine's work stopped in the 1970s, and by that time, we knew that these things were happening. We knew ESP was happening. We knew PK was happening. We knew that people were having mediumship experiences. These things had been demonstrated in very controlled conditions. Since that time, we've been trying to learn more about how it works. And this is where the process-oriented programming or research comes in. So things like, for example, the Ganzfeld, which utilized the idea of sensory deprivation and the concept of signal-to-noise ratio. Implementing studies that can use those concepts that we learn more about to see if they improve psi performance, give us more information about how it works.
I would think that the ultimate goal is exactly what you just said, improving psi performance so that you can study it more effectively, because so often the laboratory results are, well, they're interesting, they're statistically significant, but they're still very weak. And to the best of my understanding, correct me if you think I'm wrong, we know very, very little about the mechanism. The only thing I think I can say with a little bit of certainty is that when people are relaxed, they do better.
Yeah, well, I would go beyond that a bit and say that we have identified certain factors that contribute to better performance in the laboratory. But we're not sure that the laboratory conditions are exactly the same as what people are experiencing in their normal lives. The other thing that I would say is that, yes, one of the things we find in the lab, it's very hard to find consistency. So often we have people come in and do really well one day, and the next day we get no results at all. And it's a question, what is different between these days? What is different in the individual? What is different in the environment? What is different in the stars, in the universe? Is the gravitational pull of the Earth? We're looking at anything to see if we can figure out what might be different. But, Jeff, what's amazing is that at the lab at the Rhine, we've encountered certain people who are consistent, who are able to perform regularly and on command, and are able to do things like, for example, in our bioenergy lab, they're able to produce results very consistently, nearly every session. The last study I did, I was looking at 5 individuals who had come to the lab and done well in the light lab in the past. And we ran 50 sessions with them to determine, are they able to control this? Are they able to intentionally produce these effects? And we found with a 6 sigma variation that they definitely were able to control the ability, their expression of light within the lab. It was not so much the large number of photons they were producing, but the fact that they were able to do it so consistently. Out of 50 sessions, 20 of them demonstrated a strong variation from the baseline. That's 40%. This is a very large variation. And for a phenomena you would expect to happen once every once in a million, and we saw it 16 or 20 times within 50 sessions.
Do you consider the emission of ultra-weak light to be a form of psi?
again, we're looking at mechanisms here. This is where I'm trying to say, hey, what is this energy that people are talking about? And the production of them in and of themselves is normal for people. It's natural. It's not, I wouldn't consider it psi at all. But what it may be a factor in enabling psi to occur. This is one of the things we're exploring. Is it a factor in healing occurring? Is it a factor in PK occurring? Is it a factor in mediumship experiences? Are they correlated? And so the actual expression of the light is not psi in and of itself, but it may be one of the mechanisms that enable psi to occur.
It certainly seems a little reminiscent of some of the work with Ted Sirios in psychic photography or thoughtography. And I know of other studies I'm sure you're familiar with as well, out of China, where young children typically were the subjects and they're asked to view a target in a sealed container, but there is some photographic film where the target is. And when the children access the target correctly through clairvoyance, the photographic film is also fogged up.
Yes, and so what makes that fogged up film happen, or what causes those marks on film with Ted Sirios? What was putting those images on that blank film? And we see similar things like with the Skull Group when they're doing mediumship, that they often had undeveloped film in the room that would end up having images on it or having information on it as a result of their sessions. So the question is, what could cause this to happen? What is impacting this film? Now, film is designed to respond to light. Is it the light that we're measuring? This is invisible light. It wouldn't normally be picked up by normal photographic film. But it may be that once it reaches a certain level, for example, if you reach, I think it's 300,000 photons a second in the ultraviolet range, it will start to become visible. Someone sitting in the room may be able to see flashes of light. It's possible that that level of expression may impact the film and cause different strikes or strokes on the film, cause it to fog up, cause it to have certain effects on the film.
Do you have data that suggests there is a correlation between psi scores in the laboratory and the emission of photons?
It's really interesting because, as I was saying earlier, I've had people who are healers who have been doing the work for years, and they're excellent. They've gotten excellent results working with people, and I get no results in my lab. Zero. They're baseline the entire time. One person in particular, Bill Bankston, he has tremendous success in his tradition of healing and doing research within that area. And when Bill has been in my lab and we did a session with him, I got nothing, but I know he's doing something. And when he came out, I said, Bill, and he said, it doesn't surprise me. He said, there were no mice in there. I work with mice. He said, where are my mice? So sometimes it's the situation, but other times it may be that what we're measuring is not what they are doing. It's not what they're expressing. It may not be the mechanism that they are using. This is where I question what's different about this one healer versus that one who does get an expression in the lab. What I've found most often is that the ones who are most directed and intentional in their healing process, for example, if you go to a doctor and you say, my ankle is bothering me, the doctor is going to go directly to your ankle and going to intentionally treat you. If you were to go to a holistic doctor and say, my ankle is bothering me, they're going to ask, do you get any exercise? What do you do in your life normally? They're going to start looking at you more as a full person. That's a different approach. Yeah. Healers take different approaches. The ones who I find are taking a very directed and intentional approach in my lab are the ones that I traditionally see produce light in my lab as well.
I see. That suggests that something is going on that totally transcends the idea of mechanism.
I'm still looking for mechanism.
Yeah.
It's just that the mechanisms that I'm looking at may only apply to a certain group of healers, rather than having this homogeneous view of all healing being the same. We may have certain categories of healing that are different. We also often think of healing as an energy-based system.
Yeah.
That similar to PK, that there is a sender who is sending information or sending energy to a target and fixing the problems at that target or causing something to move, in the case of PK, at that target location.
Yeah.
But when I talk to healers, they don't talk that way. Most of the healers do not speak in terms that where they might say they're moving energy, but it's to remove blockages and allow the energy to flow naturally. The body has natural energies. Oftentimes they say the body has its own ability to heal itself, and there are just things blocking that occurring.
Mm-hmm.
Potentially, this changes our model of how we look at healing. Instead of healing being all so close to PK in nature, potentially healing is an information-based system.
Yeah.
Perhaps the healer is actually sending information to a patient and saying, I'm going to provide an environment to allow you to heal yourself. I'm not healing you, but I'm allowing the healing to occur in you.
Yeah.
When we start looking at this different model of healing, we start looking at how could that information get from one person to another. How does information get from me to you, Jeff? It's using fiber optic cables. It's using light. We're looking at light in our lab, and we're seeing the same mechanisms. We're seeing light being expressed when people say they're doing healing. Perhaps this is evidence enhancing the idea that it's an information-based system. So it's not something we can't figure out at all. It's something we have to start looking at with a different perspective in order to understand it more clearly.
You've been at this for about 15 years, haven't you?
In this lab, yes. I've been doing this for 15 years. The lab was originally started over at Duke University by Bill Joines and Steve Bauman. But we've moved it into the Rhine, and I've been working at it for 15 years.
Would you say, based on the progress you've made in the last 15 years, that we can expect a breakthrough in the next 15?
We can always be hopeful, Jeff, but it's when we're talking about these different phenomena, and when we're talking about parapsychology in general, the funds are so limited. When we design an experiment, we have some really great ideas, things that we think could really help us to move forward. Finding the funding to support it can be difficult. And this is where we look to different organizations. For example, the Bial Foundation in Portugal provides a lot of funding for different people in parapsychology. There are independent organizations that provide some support for the field of parapsychology. But usually we're looking at individuals who are interested, who can help us to grow as an organization. Or, as is often the case in this field, we're doing our work for free. Because we have this intense desire to know more, this, a strong interest. And so we follow the path, not looking at it for financial gain, not looking for fame or looking to learn more about the phenomena, because we know not only will it help us to feel better, but it will help the people who are having the experiences to know more. And knowing that there is a scientific foundation for their experiences, there's a basis for what they're experiencing, gives them some confidence that they can move forward in life and feel confident in what they're doing.
Well, John G. Kruth, what a pleasure to be with you once again. I admire the work that you're doing, and I particularly admire the passion with which you do it. I think that's a unique characteristic of those of us who have devoted our lives to this controversial field. John, thank you so much for being with me today.
Jeff, I'm always happy to see you, and I'd love to do this again because I think, as I said last time, there's so much more to talk about.
Good.
It's always good to see you, Jeff.
I won't wait 6 years for the next time.
Great. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. And for those of you who are watching or listening, thank you for being with us, because you are the reason that we are here.
3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
You can now download a free PDF copy of issue number 8 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine, or order a beautiful printed copy. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.